Welcome back to the Obby series. In today's episode, we're going to be creating a brand new GUI button, which when clicked on will allow us to invite our friends to our game. And surprisingly, this is really easy to do. Now, we need to do one or two things before we hop into Studio. The reason for this is because Roblox actually allows us to customize the message which is sent to a player when they're invited by their friend to join our game. And in order to utilize that, we actually have to manage our game from the creator dashboard. Now, I'll leave a link down below in the description to the creator dashboard. It's literally just create.roblox.com. But if you would like to also know how to access it from roblox.com, all you have to do is click on the create button directly next to the search bar, and that'll take us to the creator dashboard. Now that we're here, I'm going to want to go to creations, then I'm going to want to find our game, and then I'll click on it. And then once we're on this page, we're going to want to scroll down a little bit, all the way to the engagement tab, and then we're going to want to select notifications. So on this page, we're able to create a notification string. And like I said, the notification string will be used when the player sends out an invite. So let's go ahead and click on the create a notification string button. And then the first thing that we need to do is specify the name of it, which doesn't exactly matter. It's just for us to know what this is actually used for. And I'm going to go ahead and call this friend invite. Now, in the notification string box is where we can actually specify what the message will look like when a player sends another player an invite. Now, we can kind of ignore this example right here because invite prompts are a little bit different. So as we can read below, it actually says for player invite prompts, the experience name, and that's surrounded in curly braces. So inside of the notification string, we can actually use variables. And this is an example of one of those variables, which is called experience name, and this is a variable that Roblox actually generates by default. So if we continue reading this, it says that for player invite prompts, experience name is required and display name is optional. So we get a second placeholder here given to us, which is display name. And if we continue reading even further, additional custom placeholders are not supported. So that's why I said that we could ignore the example that's inside of this box, because quest left is a custom placeholder which is not used by player invites. Anyways, a little bit further down, we can actually see a nice example. So it says display name is inviting you to join and then the experience name. And that's a really good example of a basic invite. To make this even easier on ourselves, let's go ahead and copy this and paste it directly inside of the notification string. Now, just to make this easier to understand for you, what I wrote out here is an example of what this notification string will look like when it's used in an invite. So imagine that I'm sending you an invite to join the game and play with me. What you'll receive is an invite saying, MonzterDev is inviting you to join Super Simple Obby. So hopefully you now understand that. Let's go ahead and spice this invite up a little bit. Rather than saying the player is inviting you to join and then the game name, I'm going to say display name thinks they can beat your stage in experience name. So Super Simple Obby. Now actually, I'm going to make the S in stage lowercase. But yeah, when a player sends an invite to another player, the invite will say, MonzterDev thinks they can beat your stage in Super Simple Obby. So I think that invite is a little bit cooler than the basic example they showed us, but of course you can make it whatever you'd like. Anyways, once you've done that, you're going to want to scroll down a little bit and then click on the create notification string button. Once we click on that, it should take us back to the notification screen where we can see all of the notifications that we've created, and then we should see our friend invite notification right here. You should be able to see the asset ID column, and you're going to want to go ahead and actually copy this ID and paste it inside of a notepad, or just keep the browser open but minimized because we're going to need to use this ID in a little bit. And we need to do one last thing before we actually get into Studio, which is downloading this GUI pack. Well, you can actually skip the thing that I'm going over right now if you want to skip over to the next chapter, but that's if you have your own icon pack. Because when we create the GUI today, we're actually going to be using an icon from my icon pack. Now, this icon pack is actually completely free. All you have to do is go to monster.dev and actually create an account. Again, that's all completely free. I know our sign up page might look a little odd, as if we're selling you a membership, but again, this is all completely free. Once you enter in all your information, hit sign up, you should then be logged into the website and you should receive an email confirming that you have registered. Then what you're going to want to do is at the top right of the menu bar, we can see the word account. Hover your mouse over it, and then you'll see a little pop-up menu. You're going to want to click on downloads, which will take you to the downloads page. Then look under the free section, look under the pack section, and you should see core icon pack sign up required. And once you click on this, it should automatically start downloading for you. Once you have it downloaded, it should be a zip file. So what you have to do is right click on it and then hit extract all, or use whatever zip program and just extract the file. Then you should see a folder appear. Inside of this folder, there will be a few more. Basically, each of these 3 folders contain the same 44 icons, but the folders named stroke just actually apply a black stroke around the icons. So that's the only difference between all of them. Now that we've successfully gotten those icons downloaded and extracted, we can go inside of Roblox Studio, and to upload these into our game, what we'll do is go to the View tab, and we want to enable the Asset Manager. Now mine appears on the left over here, and you should see this little bulk import button right here. Once you click that button, you're going to want to find the folder with all of the icons in it that you want to go ahead and upload, then select all of them and click on Open. Then we can watch all of our icons being imported. And you shouldn't have any issues here, but I'd probably recommend that you probably have this over to the side and just keep it open, just in case you do have any issues, but I'm going to go ahead and close mine because that's pretty much all that we have to do. Then I'm going to go ahead and close the Asset Manager as well, but we'll probably open that up once again when we actually need to use one of the images. Anyways, with that being said, we can go ahead and get started by creating the GUI. Alright, before we begin creating the GUI, I just want to remind you that you do want to have device emulation enabled so that we're all creating the GUI at the exact same size. If you figure out how to do this since the last episode, you're going to want to go to the Test tab. Inside of the emulation section, select Device, and then you're going to want to set your resolution to the same resolution that I'm using, which is HD 1080 1920 by 1080. And you should also make sure that you have the mode set to fit to window. Now that we've done that, we can go ahead and begin creating the GUI. So we're going to go inside of the starter GUI, and we're going to go ahead and create a brand new screen GUI. We'll go ahead and rename this to be called Left, and then let's adjust its properties. So we want to set Ignore GUI Inset to True, and then we also want to set Reset On Spawn to False. We did that last time with the top GUI, and you're pretty much going to see us do that every single time. We never want any of our GUIs to ever reset on spawn, and we pretty much always want them to ignore the GUI inset. Anyways, with that being said, we'll then go ahead and add a frame inside of here. Now, it might be hard to actually see the frame being added in at the top left corner of our screen, so let's go ahead and readjust our camera to make sure that we're easily able to see that. Then let's go ahead and modify the size of this frame. So on the y-axis, I'm going to set it to 1 on the scale, and then 0 on the offset because I want it to stretch the entire height of our screen. And then for the x-axis, I'm going to leave that at 100 in the offset. Then inside of the frame, we'll go ahead and add in a text button. Now, in order for us to be able to easily see this text button, what I'm going to do is adjust the background color of it, and I'm going to go ahead and set it to this nice blue color right there. Then I'll adjust the text property of this, and I'm going to change this from button to just a blank string because we don't actually want any text to be displayed on this button. Now, the next thing we're going to do is adjust its sizing. For the x-axis, I'm going to actually set the scale to 1 because we want the width to be 100 pixels, and I'll set the offset of the x to 0. And then for the y-axis, I'm actually going to go ahead and set the offset to 100. So effectively, this text button is 100 by 100 pixels. So it's a perfect square. Now, thinking a little further ahead, we're actually going to want to have multiple text buttons inside of this frame because we're going to want to display multiple buttons for the player to click on. And because of that, there's actually a useful GUI instance that we can use. So we'll go ahead and add this to the frame, and that is actually called a UI grid layout. And with a UI grid layout, what we can do is we can easily set the size of all of the children inside of our frame, and we can also easily lay them out in a specific order. So let me show you what I mean by that. If we look at the UI grid layout, we can see a couple of different properties. First, we can take a look at the cell size property. What this property does is it actually controls the size property of every single child inside of this frame. So if we look at the size property on the text button, we can actually see that there's now a caution symbol next to it, and that's because we're not actually able to modify this property anymore of the text button because of the UI grid layout's cell size. That is now what controls the size property of every single element inside of this frame. Now, the default size is actually the exact one that we want to use, but we can also adjust the cell size to what we originally set the text button to. So on the X scale, we'll actually set that to 1, and on the X offset, we'll set that to 0, which is effectively the exact same thing. Anyways, to further show you exactly what this UI grid layout allows us to do, let's go ahead and duplicate this a couple of times. And now we can see that those other text buttons have been automatically laid out. We can even see some spacing in between them as well. Now, that spacing is actually controlled by the cell padding. So the cell padding is also a UDIM2, so it has an X and a Y axis. And we can use this to specify the amount of spacing between each of the elements. So we can go ahead and adjust the y-axis, and currently this is at 5, so there's a 5 pixel space between each of the elements. If we set this to, say, 50, then of course that goes up to 50 pixels between each of those elements. Now, I'm actually going to go ahead and set this to 25, because once this is all finished, I think that'll be a pretty good spacing for between them. And then aside from the cell padding, we also have a couple of cool properties inside of the behavior section. For instance, we have the fill direction, which is currently set to horizontal, but it effectively acts as vertical because of how our frame is set up and the size of each text button. Now, there's a couple of other things in here, but we're not going to talk about those properties yet because they don't really apply to this. But we also have the alignment section, and the horizontal alignment is set to left by default, but because the buttons take up the entire width, if we modify the horizontal alignment property, nothing actually changes because the text buttons take up the entire width. Instead, though, we can actually change the vertical alignment, and we're going to set that to center. So now all of the text buttons are vertically centered in this frame. And that's pretty much all that we're going to do with the UI grid layout for now. I just kind of wanted to introduce that concept to you and especially transition from resizing the text button to implementing the UI grid layout, which also controls its size property as well. Anyways, I'm going to delete all the text buttons except for one. And then I'm actually going to update the frame again real quick. I want to adjust the position a tiny bit. So on the x-axis, I'm going to set the offset to 10 because that'll now give us a 10 pixel spacing between this frame and the left side of our screen. The reason that we're doing that is because if we look at the top frame, we can also see that that has 10 pixels coming down from the top. So for everything that we kind of put along the sides, we're going to have a 10 pixel spacing between that and the edge of the screen. Anyways, with that being said, we can actually then go ahead and set the background transparency of the frame to 1 so that we no longer see that white background. And because my text button is blue, I'm going to kind of move it over a little bit so that we can more easily see it. And then let's actually go back to the text button. Now, I'm going to go ahead and rename this text button social because this is actually going to be the social button, which players can click on to be prompted to invite their friends to the game. Then the next thing that I'm going to do with this text button is I'm actually going to go ahead and add in a UI corner to this. I believe I already told you what the UI corner does, but effectively this allows us to round the edges on GUI elements and make them more round or curved. And with this, we'll actually set the corner radius's scale to 1 and the offset to 0. This allows us to actually create a circle. So now we can see a perfect little circle right here. And now the next thing that we're going to do inside of this button is we're actually going to go ahead and add in a UI stroke to it. And we actually want to change the apply stroke mode property from contextual to border. The reason for this is because when it's on contextual, contextual actually makes the stroke appear on the text inside of the text button. So it kind of relies on the context of what is being parented to. So like, let's just go ahead and say hello inside of here. And now the text color is black, but now if we make that white, we can barely see it, but we can actually see that the stroke is now being applied around the text. So that's why we want to swap the mode from contextual to border so that it actually appears around the border of the button. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and actually clear out the text of the text button once again, like we had it before. Anyways, going back to the UI stroke, we're actually going to set the thickness of this to 5 so that it's nice and large. Then the next thing that we're going to do inside of here is we're actually going to go ahead and add in an image label. We'll go ahead and rename this to be called icon. And then let's go ahead and set the image of it. And the image that I'm looking for is the social image right here. So once we click that, we should see it appear right there. Then what I'm going to do is set the background transparency of this to 1 so that we don't see the background. For the size of it, I'm going to set it to 0.75 on both the X and the Y scale. You could also set the offset to 75 as that would set it to 75 pixels as well, but I'm just going to go ahead and use scale here. Now that we've resized it, let's also reposition it as well. And I want to center this on our button. So for the anchor point on the X and the Y, I'm going to set both of those to 0.5. And then for the X and the Y scale on the position, we'll set both of those to 0.5 as well. Then the final thing that we want to do with this image label is actually change the scale type from stretch over to fit. And now that icon is looking pretty good inside of that button. And now the next thing we're going to do is actually add in a text label to this button as well. We'll go ahead and rename this to be called title. And the reason that we're renaming this text label to be called title is just because that's my go-to name when it comes to text labels. In this scenario, we're not actually going to be like using this in a script or anything, but I just prefer to call my text labels titles or something like that rather than calling it actually a text label. Anyways, with this text label, what we're going to do is set the text of it to say the word social. You could even change the text to say something like invite or friend or something like that, whatever works for you. Then we'll go ahead and set the text color to be white. We'll go ahead and set the background transparency to be 1 so that we no longer see that. Then for the size of this, we're going to set that to 26. Let's go ahead and adjust the font to be Fredoka 1. And let's adjust the actual size of this as well. So for the size, we're actually going to set the X scale to 1 so that's the entire width of this. And then for the Y, we're actually going to set the Y offset to 26 so that it's only 26 pixels tall, which is the same height as our text size. The next thing we want to do is position this text label towards the bottom of our button. And we want to position it in a pretty precise way. We pretty much want the text to be halfway coming off of the stroke of this text button. So let's go to the position. And for the anchor point, on the X, we're going to set that to 0.5 because we want to center it horizontally. But for the Y, we're going to set that to 1 because we want it to appear all the way at the very bottom. Then going to the position, for the X scale, we're going to set that to 0.5. And for the Y scale, we're going to set that to 1 so that it appears towards the bottom. And now for the Y offset, what we're going to do is divide the Y offset of the size property by 2. So remember when we set the offset of the Y axis of the size property to 26? Well, we're going to go ahead and add 13 pixels to the Y offset of this position. And now when we can do that, it might be hard to see, but we actually have now positioned that text perfectly towards the bottom. To make it even easier to see though, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and duplicate this UI stroke and drag that inside of the title. Now you didn't really actually have to duplicate it, but now we actually need to change the apply stroke mode from border to contextual. And now we can see that wraps right around the text. I'm going to decrease the thickness here a tiny bit though, so I'm going to go from 5 down to 4. And for the line join mode, I prefer going with either bevel or midder. And with that being said, we've actually now finished with creating this button. So we can take a quick peek at what this would look like if we had multiple buttons. So let's go ahead and duplicate this maybe a couple of times, and now we can see what it actually looks like if we have 4 buttons on the left. And I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to delete all those extra ones, just leaving one social button. And now we're pretty much fully finished with creating that, but the last thing that we need to do is add the UI scale to this new GUI. And since we already have one inside of the top GUI, let's just go ahead and duplicate this or copy and paste it into the left GUI. And with that being said, we're now fully finished with creating that GUI, so we can collapse the starter GUI. Now that we finished creating that GUI, let's go ahead and begin scripting this. So in order to begin scripting this, we're going to go inside of the starter player, inside of the starter player scripts, inside of the controllers folder, and we're going to actually go ahead and update the GUI controller. So once we open that up, what we're going to actually want to make an update to is the GUIs table right here. So we're going to want to go ahead and add that brand new screen GUI that we just created, which is called left. So we're going to say left equals player GUI, wait for child, and then left. And that's actually all that we're going to do inside of here. And now that we've added it to here, when we require the GUI controller inside of our other scripts, we'll be able to easily access the left GUI that we just created. So we can go ahead and close out of that. Then I'm going to go inside of the GUIs folder, and I'm actually going to go inside of the top folder, and we have our stage module script right here. I want to go ahead and duplicate this and now drag this inside of the GUIs folder. We'll go ahead and rename this to be called social, and then we'll go ahead and open it up. The reason I wanted to duplicate that is so that we can save some time with some pre-existing variables. Like for instance, we're going to need the players variable. We don't actually need the replicated storage variable. Instead, we need another service. We actually need the social service. So let's go ahead and update the variable right here for the social service. We are going to need our player variable and our GUI controller as well, but now we have to update this a little bit because we did move it from a different folder. So now we've got our GUI controller. We're not going to need either of these two variables, so we can go ahead and delete them. We do want to update the GUI variable because currently it's set to the top GUI and we want to set that to the left GUI. And then we can pretty much remove all of this stuff and the rest of this code as well. Pretty much you should just be left with some variables and the default setup of our module scripts. Now below the GUI variable, we're going to go ahead and create a variable for the specific text button that we just created. So I'm going to call this variable button, and the specific button that we're talking about is inside of the GUI, inside of the frame, and we want to set this to the social button. Now that we've created that, we're going to go a little bit further down and we're going to create another local variable, and we're actually going to call this invite options. And what we want to set this to is actually an instance. So we're going to say instance.new, and then the specific instance that we want to create is an experience invite options. And we need to use this when we're sending out an invite to another player. So with this instance, it actually has a property called prompt message, which is the custom text shown on the invite prompt for the sending player. And what they mean by this is that little text string, which is displayed right above all of the player's friends that they can actually invite to the game. So we're going to set this property to a string. And for that string, I'm going to instruct the player who wants to send out an invite to their friends by saying challenge friends to beat your stage. Then the invite options has another property, which is called invite message ID. And remember that message that we created earlier inside of the creator dashboard? Well, we need to specify the ID of the message we created earlier right here. So inside of the string, we can go ahead and specify that right here, just like that. Now that we've created all of those things, let's go ahead and start scripting sending out an invite. The first thing we need to do before we actually try to send an invite out is check if the player is even able to send invites out. The reason for this is because players can be on different platforms, and on certain platforms, they're not actually able to invite other players. So we're going to go ahead and create a function, which is going to be a part of the local table, and that's going to be called canSendInvite. And it's not going to have any parameters. Now inside of here, we're going to use a p call. And to do this, we're going to say local success, then a comma, and then we'll say can send. So we're actually creating two variables right here, and then we'll set them equal to a p call. So a p call is basically a global function, and inside of here, we actually want to go ahead and create an anonymous function. And now inside of this function is where we actually want to check if the player can send an invite or not. Now, what a p call allows us to do is basically execute code which could possibly result in an error. And if it does result in an error, then it won't break our code or stop the rest of the code from actually executing. So what the p call function will actually return for the first variable is success. So the first thing that'll be returned from p call is a Boolean value. And success will be true unless an error has actually occurred inside of the p call. And then the second thing that's returned from the p call is either the error that occurred inside of the p call or anything that we returned from inside of it. So many times you'll see the second variable of a p call be called error. And that's because there's definitely some scenarios where people don't use the second variable, but we will be in this scenario, which is why we're calling this canSend. Because inside of this p call, we're going to use a function and we'll return if the player can actually send an invite or not. So that's what we'll do. We'll go ahead and say return. And now to check if a player is able to send an invite or not, we're going to use the social service, and we'll use a method of it. So we'll use a colon. And the method that we want to use is can send game invite async. And what we need to pass through to this function is actually the player who we want to try to send the invite from. So that's the local player here. Then outside of the P call, once that has actually ran, what we want to do is actually return success and can send. And the reason that we're doing that is because if this did not error out, then success would be true. But if the player is unable to send an invite, then can send could be false. So what we're doing here is we're making sure that this P call was actually successful and there was no errors. And we're also making sure that can send is set to true as well, because this could also be false if the player is unable to send out invites. Cool. So now that we've created that function, the next thing that we're going to do is actually go ahead and create the onStart function. So we're going to say function shared.onStart. And now, inside of this function, what we want to do is check if the player is able to actually send invites or not. So we're only going to do this when the game starts up for the first time, and we will never check again if the player is able to send invites or not. So we'll go ahead and create a variable called canSendInvite, and we'll set that equal to local.canSendInvite. Now, if the player is unable to send an invite, then what we want to do is we want to actually make that GUI button that we just created not visible. Because why would we want the player to see the button if they're not even actually able to use it or invite their friends to the game? So to do this, we're going to say button.visible, and we'll set this equal to canSendInvite. So what this means is the button will be visible if the player is actually able to send an invite, because canSendInvite would be true. But if the player is unable to send an invite, then canSendInvite would be false, so the visibility of the button would be set to false as well, and the button would not be able to be seen. Then in addition to that, we also have to set up what actually happens when we click on this button. So we'll go ahead and say button.mousebutton1click connect and create an anonymous function inside of here. Now, if the button is clicked on, this is where we actually want to prompt the player to invite their friends to the game. And to do this, we actually need to use a P call again. So we're going to say local success, error equals P call, and then we'll create an anonymous function inside of here. Now, how we're handling this here is we actually don't care about success or error, because we're not going to use them at all. So that's the key reason why we call the second variable here error, because we're not going to use either of these. Anyway, since we are still in a P call, let's go ahead and follow the recommendations of a P call. So we're still going to use return inside of here, and then we'll actually prompt the player to send an invite. And we can do this by using the social service once again, and we need to use a method of it. And the method that we need to use is prompt game invite. And what do we need to pass through to this method? Well, the player that we want to prompt and the invite options as well. So now when the player clicks this button, Roblox's default GUI for inviting players to the experience will pop up for them if they are actually able to invite players to the game. And with that being said, we're actually fully finished with scripting this entire thing. So we can go ahead and close out of this and actually hop into our game and test this out. Now, when we hop into our game, we can click the social button right here, and we can see that we are prompted to invite our friends. The thing is, though, is that you might be missing the message right here, which we specified in the invite options previously. And I didn't realize this before, but luckily I just realized this. There is a specific reason for that. Let's go back to the social script, and inside of here, where we specify the prompt message, I test this out a little bit, and it seems like this message can be a maximum of 35 characters. And unfortunately, this message that we have right here is actually 37. So when it goes over the 35 character limit, it just does not display a message at all. And they don't specify this in the documentation, so there might be a different limit. Maybe different characters are a different size or things like that. I'm not 100% sure, but that's just what it seems like to me. So I'm going to change this message to challenge friends to beat you, which is within the character limits. Now we can go back into our game, start it up, and test this out. Once we get inside of here, click the social button, and now we can see we're prompted to invite our friends, and we can actually see the challenge friends to beat you message right here. And we can see that I just sent my friend an invite, and it says that I've invited them. And here's an example of what that invite looked like when my friend received it. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, we've now begun creating what I would describe as the left menu buttons. And we've also added a way for players to invite their friends to our game very easily. With that being said, that's going to be it for this episode. As always, if you did enjoy, make sure you smash the like button. Leave a comment down below letting other people know that this worked for you. And if you want to get access to a ton of resources, including everything that we created in today's episode, and support me, there's a link down below in the description to my website or Patreon. You can support me on either of those platforms and get access to a ton of resources as well. Anyways, with that being said, I hope that you have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.